Congratulations to our new Panamanian overlords. It's the Gulf of Panama now. That's how the Nations League works. Welcome to a quick take, hot take episode of the Total Soccer Show. I'm glad we can laugh. My name is Taylor Rockwell. With me to give his thoughts on the USA's shock, but as the game went on, increasingly predictable 1-0 loss to Panama in the CONCACAF Nations League semifinal is the man himself, Mr. Joe Lowry. Hello, Joe. That was a game of soccer we watched.
Yeah, that wasn't as fun as I thought it was going to be,
No.
Taylor. And I don't know, should I blame you for that? Should I blame me? Should I blame Graham or Ryan? I'm going to blame Ryan, I think, overall.
I think that's fair. Generally speaking, when things go wrong, it's fair to blame Ryan Bailey. I think that's how it works. Always blame the English.
Yes.
We are here, as I said, to do our quick take, hot take breakdown of the USA's 1-0 loss, a result that means we will meet the loser of Mexico's game with Canada in the CONCACAF Nations League third place game, as opposed to the final. The USA not contesting the final for the first time ever. At least there's another game to be played, but it is definitely a worrying result, more so than just the scoreline. Sometimes you're going to have a smash and grab loss late. You don't never want that, but things can go the wrong way occasionally. This game felt, honestly, increasingly likely that Panama were going to win it, I think, as it went on. Or at the very least, it felt like we were going to penalties because it did not seem like the U.S. was destined to create all that much.
Yeah, totally agreed. This was so sleepy, right? Like, across the board for the United States. It just felt really timid. It felt really lackadaisical. And credit to Panama, who are just a super well-coached team under Thomas Christensen. I've really, really enjoyed watching his displays with this team. I think he's been coaching them since 2020, so he's been around for a long time in CONCACAF years, and I guess in generally international soccer years. Panama defended in a really deep, really compact 5-4-1 block, and the U.S. just didn't have answers. They had some chances. There's the Weston McKennie header in the first half. There's the Josh Sargent shot that hits the post after taking a deflection, and there's the Ajiman shot after Weston McKennie plays him through in the second half. I feel like those were the three main chances that stick out to me in this game. The U.S. had the better looks overall. Still, I don't think this result was unfair. The U.S. had a chance to punish Panama, either with their finishing or just by creating a higher volume of chances, and they didn't. They let Panama hang around. There was not a ton of incision for the U.S. for the vast majority of this game, and Panama ended up advancing. Like, I honestly, for me, it's kind of that simple. And we can talk about the reasons why that is, both today and tomorrow. But that, for me, was the story of this game.
Yeah, I mean, two things there, Joe. First off, I think you nailed it with just a sleepy performance. It's like if the Greeks showed up outside of Troy in the Trojan War and then just sort of, I don't know, moved their like siege equipment around from side to side, but didn't actually do anything. I don't know if they had siege
We'll
equipment,
swap
but you
two
get
of
my
our
point.
best siegers at halftime from one half space to the other, and that's going to help us
That
siege
should
better.
do it. We're not actually going to go at the wall. Maybe we will very late. But, we're just going to give it some time and see how things develop. Because, Panama, for the most part, just kind of sat in, as you said, in that 5-4-1. Occasionally, the U.S. would try to pass through. Occasionally, they would have individuals try to dribble through. Oftentimes, they would cross the ball. Oftentimes not to anybody in particular. And I think that is a thing that I will be, the second thing that I was going to lead with, I think I will be paying attention to on the rewatch is why couldn't the U.S. create as much? Now, certainly much was made of the dimensions of this pitch, a very narrow one, about 10% smaller than what we would expect to play on at a World Cup and at the World Cup in 2026. So that is, to some extent, an explanation. However, Panama very, very tight through the middle in that 5-4-1, and the U.S. never seemed like they were consistently trying one thing or one approach. It felt like it was a lot of sort of passing, very cautious passing at that, and not really relentlessly pushing forward, relentlessly applying that pressure. Maybe that's an unrealistic expectation for this brief period into Mauricio Pochettino's tenure, but it was still just very listless from start to finish, in my opinion.
Totally. And some of the early reasons that I think about as for why that was the case for the U.S. I think part of it is personnel based in that I'm not sure that Pochettino nailed his lineup for this game. Pochettino knows a lot more about soccer than I do. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt in a lot of ways, just as I tend to do for most managers because they all know more about soccer than I do. But from the lineup and from some of the individual U.S. performances where I just didn't think the U.S. was super sharp. And a lot of that, frankly, was Christian Pulisic. This was one of those games where you watch Pulisic and it is far more frustrating than it is fun for me. There's a moment in the first half where it's him sort of in the left half space to start the game, and it's way out wide on the left in possession, which is a look that we saw back in November and was a lot of fun back in November. I think there was merit to that pairing on the left side, but Pulisic is trying to play Weah forward on the break, and Weah comes back and checks to the ball, and I think it trickles out of bounds. At the very least, it's a turnover, and the attack comes to nothing for the United States, and that felt like a microcosm of the U.S. as a whole. And then there's the fact that in this lineup, and we messaged about this during the game, Poch starts Joe Scally, who ends up playing left back in this game. He starts Tanner Tessman next to Tyler Adams. He starts Yunus Musa as the right back that becomes more of a right winger in possession. And you just don't have a lot of really clever attacking players who thrive in tight spots. Pulisic should be that guy. He wasn't in this game. Way I thought had a pretty good game overall. And Weston McKennie was pretty quiet. Outside of those guys, who else are you looking to create chances for you? When Gio Reyna and Diego Luna are planted to the bench, I kind of think that this is the performance that you were asking for.
Yep, agree entirely. And to start with the Reyna and Luna of it all, I think the broadcast team gave some explanation about Reyna and Pochettino not having as much familiarity with his individual game, hadn't watched a ton of him at Dortmund, which is potentially an issue unto itself. And so maybe there wasn't as much familiarity, so he wanted to stick with players that he felt like he knew what they could bring. But that still then begs the question, why no Diego Luna, who he did see in January and does know what he can add to a team that desperately needs someone to try to thread the needle and find passes and create individually and just try stuff that no one else is trying. I think there are reasons, certainly, why neither one of those players was involved. I'm not sure I'm inclined to love those reasons because of just how lethargic the United States looked, again, from start to finish. And I think to spend a second on the Pulisic of it all for a moment.
Sure.
That is one thing that I'm definitely going to be spending some time on in the rewatch, which I will be planning to rewatch. I can't wait.
Taylor, you're an American hero. I just want that out there right now. People need to know.
I need to understand more of why this happened. Because if there is like a rational explanation, and I think some of it could just be very small pitch, very defensive team, lacking a lot of starters due to injury, or at least a few difference makers due to injury, and then some of the squad stuff you've already talked about. Maybe it's as simple as that. But Pulisic, I genuinely couldn't tell if he had a bad night and it was that kind of like sloppy Pulisic performance, or if it was just that he was the only one who was trying stuff. He was the only one who was taking people on, and so he's going to look worse by comparison. The one that really made me sort of start to focus in on that is when he gets the yellow card. And that felt for me, it's for people who haven't watched, for people who don't remember, he tries to take a player on 1v1, loses the ball, and then goes in pretty recklessly from behind. Definitely deserved the yellow for it. But to me, that just felt like he's trying to do something. He's trying to kind of spark a fight, spark some intensity from this team, and he's trying to take people on. He's trying to create something. There's just not a lot to be created. There's not a lot of movement around him. It's a weird one. Maybe it is a things can be two things sort of situation, but I cannot tell if this was him trying to do too much and not being sharp enough, or trying to do something. It's just no one else was trying, so it looked like too much by comparison.
Yeah, maybe a bit of both, to be honest. And this is where I got to do some work on the rewatch. I didn't feel like Pulisic did that much in this game, where I feel like I can almost think of more moments in my head where he's on the ball and doesn't fully commit to taking someone on. Not least because there wasn't a lot of space around him. And again, that's a credit to Panama. Breaking down low blocks is hard. The U.S. still did a poor job of it in this game. But yeah, I don't know. Pulisic just didn't seem on his game tonight. And this game was not the one that is best suited for him, right? Where space is tight, and I think he's a player who would much prefer to go and attack and blow by you on the break. And he just didn't have those opportunities in this game. But I didn't think Pulisic was good at all. Like I said, I didn't think Weston McKennie was very good, although I liked his movement on the header and had some nice moments of combination play with Yunus Musa in the first half. There were some good things for the United States, and they could have won this game. This is not a skies falling thing. Not making it to the CONCACAF Nations League final stinks because you want to win stuff. But this is
Ideally,
not...
yeah.
I don't think any of us are panicked about what happened, but it's just... Frankly, it's a discouraging performance at the same stadium that you're going to be kicking off your World Cup campaign in just over a year, right? Like it's not the kind of thing that you like to see building into a World Cup. And I really am, to go back to the lineup, I'm so curious, and we'll hear about this. I'm sure someone's going to ask Pochettino about this. Why no Gio Reyna? Like what were those reasons? Tony Meola did exactly what you were talking about, Taylor. He talked about how, Pochettino keeps talking about trust, and he likes players that he's worked with before, and Gio's not one of those guys because he hasn't been in camp yet. I just think that's a little ridiculous, frankly. Maybe there's another reason for this that we don't know, and maybe Pochettino's not going to say stuff. We've been around this with Gio before. I don't know anything here. It just seemed really strange to me that you're struggling to create chances against Panama, And the two subs that you go to first are Patrick Agyemang to change your striker to move Josh Sargent to the bench, and Jack McGlynn, who is basically Tanner Tessman in a lot of ways. Although, to McGlynn's credit, I thought he was pretty good off the bench and looked a lot better than Tanner Tessman did. So, I mean, that's cool. Agyemang did some good stuff too. Just where are the 10s? Like, you called two of them into your squad, and I just don't get it, man. I just don't.
I don't either, and I think it's definitely a thing to kind of do some digging on and hope that somebody presses him a bit to get some more answers. Because to your point, like McGlynn, I think was tidier on the ball and tried some stuff. He is the one where I think he threads the needle pretty well for Tim Weah, and then that doesn't end up. I think it ends up being a corner. But there's moments as the game goes on and in the final 10 to 15 minutes when I think twice McGlynn collects a like partially cleared ball, like sort of in the half space. And you can see him think, should I put this back in? And then instead, he turns and plays it back centrally. And you are right that I think McGlynn did look fine. However, you want there to be somebody in there who is then like, I'm taking this and I'm playing it to the back post. I'm going to take a touch inside and have a shot. I'm going to try to keep going. I'm going to make this pressure relentless. And it felt like the U.S. kept sort of resetting, kept trying to kind of keep everything safe, keep numbers where they needed to be. And that's all well and good. But when you then sort of can't win a 50-50 ball, don't track your runner, and if you're Matt Turner, maybe hug the near post a little bit too much, then suddenly you're 1-0 down in injury time and things go the way they went. So that lack of sort of desperation outside of the final maybe 2 minutes after Panama were ahead, I do think was a difference maker for the United States. Yeah. Maybe they wanted to just control this game and keep possession, but I still think at a certain point you've got to kick it into another gear. Otherwise, well, here we are.
Yeah, it just wasn't there. That gear was not there for the United States.
Not really.
And to flip it around, because it's easy to harp on some of the attacking stuff, I'm really curious to look at the XG in this game, because the U.S. are certainly going to be on top. I just always try to be cognizant of if that ball from Sargent had gone in, or if that McKennie header had been better placed, the U.S. is 1-0 up, and they probably win this game, which is why I'm not like so terribly fussed about all of this, although I didn't think it was a very good performance, but I might be over-indexing a little bit on the result, but I don't think I am. This felt disappointing and looked bad for long stretches, and not just in the attack, also defensively for the United States. I thought there were a ton of issues in the press in this game, where the U.S. are pressing in a 4-4-2, and the players didn't look cohesive. They didn't look like they were on the same page in their triggers. I hope you're waving to me or your child, Taylor. I really hope
my mom, who is babysitting, has just left the building.
All right. No, your mom should be higher in the pecking order than me, so that's fine. The U.S. press was just so slow to engage and just did not look like the players were on the same page. And I'm doing a poor job of articulating specific examples. I'll have specific examples when we talk tomorrow. But I have timestamps, and I'm going to have screenshots and videos over on Backheeled, because I got to put this stuff somewhere in a visual medium, because it was horrible, like truly terrible. And it doesn't matter, because Panama, as good as they are under Thomas Christensen at building from the back and at playing through counter pressure, they're not a dangerous final third team, right? They don't have the dynamism. They don't have the quality in the final third. The U.S., and this is part of why I think Pochettino was just way too conservative with his lineup and with his substitution choices, is because Panama really weren't going to punish you. Like, they had barely any good looks in this game, and it was a great finish to end this match, and they win 1-0. Like, you could have taken off one of the defensive players, because you already weren't getting a lot of defending from this group, and pivoted to being a little bit more aggressive at, say, halftime or 60 minutes than you actually were. I was just baffled by how, frankly, bad the U.S. looked against the ball. That's not something we usually see with this team.
I was, and to double down on that, I was equally surprised by how bad our center backs looked in the air. Because even when the U.S. would apply some pressure and would force Panama to go long, I think there's two different moments in which the ball bounces, which, like, you learn at U10 level, the ball should never bounce. Because Richards, I think, can't decide if he wants to go meet it or if he wants to drop off, so he lets it kind of go in between. One of those is the one where Ream has to make the kind of weird, awkward last-ditch play, because there's also a couple moments in which Richards is just beaten in the air, and Ream has one of those as well. And if you are then going to put those numbers forward, if you are going to try to kind of basically force your opponent into going long so you can reestablish possession, you then have to reestablish possession. You can't lose a contested header, and even though there's no one around the ball, somehow have your opponent pick up the ball and just kind of alleviate pressure that way. So it felt like it was just a failure to have a unified approach on both sides of the ball. But defensively, I think that's a great spot, Joe. And I find it really frustrating, because in the first half, I did think there were moments when the U.S. would sort of get into their shape. They like good defensive transition back into the shape they wanted, usually like that 4-4-2, but then would step out slowly. And then once there was the pressing trigger, once the ball went back, there would be a little bit more of an aggressive press. And then they'd go long, and then the U.S. wouldn't kind of win the ball cleanly, or they would head it out for a throw in for Panama. And all of that defeats the purpose. And so right there's a disconnect that just doesn't make a ton of sense to me and has me definitely more nervous than I was. I think because, and this is where my monologue will go a bit longer, Joe. I apologize.
Sure.
So,
no, please.
Stay with me.
This is the spot for it, man. Do it.
But this was, maybe this is silly. Maybe I've said this in the past. I don't think I have. But this game, as it went on, was a very potentially, like, frightening potential reminder that the U.S. is not as good as I think they are. Because I think of a team playing somebody like Atletico Madrid at club level, right? You know they're going to be defensive. You know they're going to be physical, and they're going to sit in, and you're going to have to break them down. And if you are playing a team like that, if you are Real Madrid, that's a good example, right? Real Madrid won that tie?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Or won their last game or whatever it was.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, thank you. Like, you have to be patient. You have to move the ball. You have to probe, though. And you can't just sort of go to the right side, pass back to the center back, pass to the other center back. It has to be, like, quick moving, threatening, but technically precise and under control. That's how you make two defenders step out when only one needs to step out. And now there's a little gap that you can run into. The U.S., it feels like, never is fully comfortable possessing the ball with intent and with quick movement and trying to probe for vulnerabilities. And so it ends up just being this constant cycle of possession. And I can't tell if it's because they don't have ideas, which seems like an odd thing for a bunch of professionals, or they don't really have the ability to play those tight passes but still keep the ball under control even with the defender on your back and then find somebody else making the run that they need to make so that you can then find a way through. It just felt like the U.S. kind of stuck with the same slow possession we've seen from past U.S. teams, only this time they were able to create even less.
Yeah, I don't think it is a lack of like tactical planning in some ways in the final third. I think there's a limit on these players, right? Honestly, I was thinking, this is a ridiculous thought to have, and I tried to shut it down in my brain. I was thinking, who would I trade from the U.S. roster permanently to get one Lionel Messi for the 2026 World Cup? Not a game after that. You only get him for those however many games you'd need in the World Cup. And let's say if you trade Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie, and Chris Richards, you never get those guys back. Like, they just dissolve from the U.S. program. And I would trade a lot of dudes to get one Lionel Messi, right? Yeah. I mean, the U.S. just doesn't have... Messi's a silly example, right? Because he's one of one. But you can think about the other attacking players. Christian Pulisic is the U.S.'s best player, and he just doesn't. He didn't show up, and this is not new, right? He's a very good player, and I think he's a lock for the U.S. lineup, of course. But he doesn't always have what it takes in these kinds of games. From a skill set perspective, this game just doesn't really fit him in the same way that it fits some of the other best players in the world, and the U.S. just don't have those guys. I think there is a ceiling for this U.S. team. I think they are in games like this, they show that it is not as high as we all want it to be, right? That's ultimately what I think is the U.S. just don't have the difference makers to put into a game that they can turn a 1-0 game in either direction, where that's kind of where we were tonight, where it could have been 1-0 to the U.S. It ended up being 1-0 to Panama. They don't have the players that can turn a 1-0 in either side kind of game into a very solid 2-0 or a 1-0 in favor of the United States. And frankly, I think the one guy they have that can do that was sitting on the bench. And I know people make jokes about my love for Gio Reyna. I kind of think this game tonight shows why. I think it shows why he's so important to this U.S. team. Who on the field could do anything, really, in tight spots tonight? Nobody. I think the one dude was on the bench.
I do think there were some stronger individual performances than others, not necessarily from the attacking standpoint. I thought Tyler Adams was his Tyler Adams
yes,
best.
He was.
Even with some of his progressive passing issues, I thought he was better with his possession and distribution, but there were still a few errant passes, one that he slices straight out of bounds when they're trying to transition to attack. That wasn't so great. I honestly thought Yunus Musa was okay. I thought he was good in the first half, and I thought he handled some of the physicality, like tracking back, like basically chasing a ball down with a defender on him. I felt like he controlled the ball well and didn't give up sort of cheap opportunities, but also drew fouls, but then also could kind of play out on his own. I also felt like he backed himself to play passes through traffic in the U.S.'s defensive third and still kind of pulled that off. But then given that he's kind of given the entire side to attack down, I don't think there was much created in the attack. He has the one moment when he tries to do the Musa maneuver that ends up going out of bounds for a goal kick.
It happens.
Foul. Yeah, it happens sometimes. And I don't think we saw much from him in terms of attacking creativity. So I thought it was an okay performance, but in a 1-0 loss, that's certainly not going to kind of raise the interest that much.
Well, and on Musa, I agree with literally every word that you just said about him. I think that is the perfect read on his game. I thought he was pretty good in the first 2/3 of the field and just gave them nothing in the final third, right? And that's the Musa experience. And that's part of why I think it's so odd that Pochettino has used him in that wide right role so often, is he just doesn't give the United States anything in the attack. We gave Greg Berhalter a hard time for how the U.S. seemed to prioritize control over creation, right? Where it's almost like there's this sliding scale, and if you push a little bit more towards the creation end, yes, you might be a bit more vulnerable in transition, but you're gonna hopefully have some better looks in the final third. This was the game that I now kind of will associate for the United States of prioritizing control, and as I said earlier, I don't think they executed that phase of the game particularly well either. But it just boggles my mind, Taylor, that you're starting a game against Panama and play 90 minutes against Panama with Joe Scally, who gave them nothing at left back, essentially. And that was part of the job, was to stay home and be a center back. And he had a couple good moments in the second half, to be fair to Joe Scally. With Joe Scally and Yunus Musa as your fullbacks, because they were in defense, and with a midfield of Adams and McKennie and Tessman, I suppose, for long stretches of this game. Not quite the full 90 for Tessman. I just don't get it. Like, honestly, I really, really am curious to hear what Poch has to say, because, again, the dude knows more about, he'll forget more about soccer than I will ever learn. And that is totally fine. The U.S. could have won this game. It's not the end of the world. This whole thing is just super strange to me. I don't get it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Not the end of the world, but super strange. And I think super frustrating, because a point we have talked about time and time again is the limited number of windows between now and the 2026 World Cup, compounded by hosting the World Cup means not having to qualify. So we don't have qualifying games. We don't have opportunities to play teams that are going to bunker and defend very deep and make life really frustrating. Pausing there to say, I think if the U.S. advanced to the final, if they had won this game and they play, say, Mexico beats Canada. Mexico, I think, are going to want more of the ball. They're going to try to go at the U.S. a little bit more. I think that game favors the United States, and they are certainly going to play teams in 2026 that are going to take the game to the U.S. and that are going to have more of the ball and more attacking chances. And I think that tends to favor the U.S. more because they don't have to rely on that technical ability, the individual skill to get through a bunkered defense. And in those games, I think the U.S. will probably end up looking better. However, as we saw in the last World Cup, they're also going to play against teams that are going to sit 5 or 10 or however many behind the ball. More than 5, that's not enough, but you get my point. They're going to play teams that are going to bunker and defend really deep. And this was an opportunity to practice breaking that down and find ways to do so, because you're going to have to do so in 2026. So I think against stronger opposition, I still think the U.S. is probably able to spring surprises. But against opposition like this, you want them to be the one who aren't allowing surprises, but are instead just kind of playing their routine game and getting the result. I don't think that's arrogance. It is not meant to dismiss Panama. It's just a statement on the quality of the squads, even with the U.S. missing a lot of players, or at least a fair few players from that starting 11 and from the squad, generally speaking. It feels like a missed opportunity to prove that they can create against a defensive team. They can make something happen. Very much could not make something happen this evening.
Yeah, just again, like my closing thought on all this, I suppose, is it's a reality check of where the U.S. player pool is, right? The U.S. got knocked out by Panama at the Copa America. Not knocked out. They lose to Panama at the Copa America last year. And they lose to Panama again. Mm-hmm. That's back-to-back losses to Panama in meaningful competitions. This player pool is not above that sort of thing. It can be Mauricio Pochettino coaching this team. It could be Greg Berhalter coaching this team. It could be B.J. Callahan, Patches Houlihan himself. It just doesn't matter. This player pool is not above this sort of loss, and today was a reminder of that.
Joe, do you want Pochettino in his presser? Do you want him to tear them apart? Do you want him to rip this team apart? Or would you rather it be the we learned some important things. It's a good result for us in terms of learning what we need to work on. Which would you prefer?
More the rip them apart thing. I was trying to remember which one came first. Sorry, I guess it's been a long day.
It's late.
I guess there are things we learned from the U.S. in this game. I don't think we learned a lot of positive things from this game. And so I think I guess a lot of things we learned, I feel like were so preventable in so many ways. So maybe I'll feel differently on rewatch. But this game feels like U.S. was just not up for it kind of game, mixed with some odd choices made by pretty much everybody involved. And I don't know, I'm a little miffed about it. So I feel like Poch can be a little miffed about it too. Hey, if the U.S. is going to be the best team in the world in 5 years, like, the clock's ticking, guys. Pro Rel's already ruining the sport, I think.
That's the problem. One final question, Joe, for your rewatch, or for my rewatch, rather. Did you notice halftime adjustments? Like, I'm sure there were little ones, but there wasn't anything major. I thought we might get a substitution. We did not. Same. I thought we might get at least more aggressive numbers in the attack. I'm not sure we saw that either.
The one thing that I clocked was Pulisic and McKennie switching spots in the half spaces, and that also, along with it, came a change in the pressing structure, or not structure, but I guess personnel, where in the first half, Pulisic was the left-sided attacker in the half space with way a wide left, and then Pulisic would press in the front two next to Sargent of the 4-4-2, and McKennie would press as the right-sided midfielder of that line of four in the 4-4-2, and then they just swapped in the second half, where McKennie went left half space, and or maybe I have this whole thing. No, I don't have it backwards. McKennie goes left half space for a lot of the second half, and Pulisic goes wider on that right side, if memory serves. Your quizzical look makes me think maybe I'm wrong.
No. My quizzical look is there an obvious reason to do that?
Not that I can think of. I'm sure this is where sometimes those kinds of adjustments get made, and I don't really understand the reasons why, but clearly Poch and his staff saw something that made them think that Pulisic would be better over on the right side in the second half compared to the left.
No, but that's why we do the rewatch, because now I can kind of pay attention to that and think what wasn't working in the first half that maybe he thought.
I hope you solve it, because I was thinking about it and I got nothing. So maybe we'll get there together. You'll solve it tomorrow.
I can't wait. I can sort of wait. But until then, Joe, thank you for spending almost half an hour doing the quick take, hot take analysis of this one. I'm not horribly depressed, but I am slightly depressed by this one. Because, you tune in, you're ready for the win, you're ready for the final, likely against Mexico, possibly against Mexico. You never know. Maybe we meet Mexico in the third place game.
I think that's what's going to happen. Maybe that take will age poorly, but that's my bet.
All right. Could be interesting. Well, Joe,
I think this show, Taylor, was our punishment for getting to do a fun pro rel show earlier on a serious note. This was hey, we can't let these TSS guys get too high. We got to bring them back down. Pro rel's fun. You finally got it. Your national team's gonna lose. Sorry.
There you go. It's pro rel's fault. We've already established. So, Joe Lowry, thank you for joining me this evening, my friend.
Thanks, Taylor. This was fun in a weird way, I suppose.
Thank you all for joining us as well. It was fun in a weird way. Hopefully, it was somewhat fun for you all this episode, not the USA's loss. Hopefully it was a little bit cathartic, and hopefully it gave you some things to think about as we wait to record our full review tomorrow with, I believe, all four of us on that one. I look forward to Ryan's sarcastic mockery and then like half engagement as you and I go for 30 minutes on like tactical tweaks of a left back. I can't wait. Until then, listeners, thank you all again. Talk to you tomorrow.